There is a cancer eating at the Imperium. With each decade, it advances deeper, leaving drained, dead worlds in its wake. This horror, this abomination, has thought and purpose which functions on an unimaginable galactic scale. And all we can do is try to stop the swarm of bioengineered monsters it unleashes upon us by instinct. We have given the horror a name to slave our fears. We call it the Tyranid race. But if it is aware of us at all, it must know us only as prey. This is an excerpt from Inquisitor Bronislaw Chexva, which captures the true horror of the Tyranid swarm. Now imagine for a second you're looking up at the sky and suddenly you realize that the darkness between the stars is actually looking back at you, and it's starving. In the 40k universe, there are countless factions fighting for supremacy, ideology, or survival. But then you have the Tyranids. They don't want territory. They don't care about your gods, your policies, your history. To them, the most advanced starfaring civilization and the lowest insect crawling on the dirt are the exact same thing, biomass. We are literally just their groceries. The Tyranids are unlike any other intelligent species humanity has ever encountered. They are an extragalactic composite species of heinous, insidious insectoid xenos, but calling them aliens feels almost as a disservice to how terrifying their biology actually is. They aren't just any race, they are an entire spacefaring ecosystem. They don't build ships out of metal or forge weapon factories. Tyranid technology is entirely biological. Every single function of their invasion force is carried out by living genetically engineered creatures. The massive hive ships that block out suns, the guns that fire flesh-eating parasites, even the ammunition itself, it's all alive and bound to a single overriding genetic theme. When a hive fleet descends on a world, they operate on a scale which, quite frankly, may break the human mind. Their approach to warfare is the purest definition of quantity has a quality all its own, as they seek to overwhelm defenses with sheer suffocating numbers, unleashing trillions upon trillions of bioforms, ranging from ankle-biting rippers to towering nightmarish hive tyrants. Unprotected planets can be infested, stripped of all organic material, and left as dead, barren husks in a matter of weeks. The fleet doesn't even need to slow down. They simply drink a planet dry, then keep moving. What makes this biological nightmare function is, in fact, the hive mind. Every single Tyranid creature is psychically reactive, sharing and contributing to a communal consciousness that creates a gestalt mind. This allows trillions of distinct organisms to communicate and organize instantaneously across staggering distances, and it makes it an unknowable alien entity completely immune to terror or standard corruption. Even the demons of chaos, creatures made of literal nightmares and warp stuff, find no victory against them in a clash of the minds. When these two superior predators clash, it is a frenzy of unsurpassed slaughter. The Tyranids gain no sustenance from the demons' chaotic forms, and the demons cannot corrupt the cold, calculating hunger of the hive mind. To understand how they sustain this endless tide, we have to look at the heart of the hive fleet. Within the largest and most heavily defended biological ships are the Norn Queens. These highly intelligent female bioforms are the true engine of the Tyranid race. They process a biochemical soup derived from consumed worlds and use it to rapidly reproduce and genetically evolve the swarm. The Tyranid swarm is the true master of stealing useful biological traits from other species, engineering their own offspring to become even more perfect killing machines. If the Norn Queen dies, the fleet cannot replenish its numbers, but reaching them means cutting through miles upon miles of hostile, living flesh, bone, marrow, and chitin. The scariest part of this all is that we don't even really know where they came from. The name Tyranid is just a label the Imperium slapped on them after the planet Tyran, the first world they were ever recorded devouring. We definitively know that they are not from our galaxy, that they've been drifting through the intergalactic void for millennia, and that during the Horus Heresy, a massive Xenos communication device known as the Pharos was overloaded, and it acted like a cosmic dinner bell, drawing the Tyranids to the Milky Way. And they've been guided ever closer to the core of the galaxy by following the psychic beacon of the Emperor's Astronomicon. Some sources actually claim they have already consumed thousands upon thousands of galaxies, eradicating millions upon trillions of intelligent species. And the current fleet tearing the Imperium and the galaxy apart, the ones wiping out sector after sector of space, they are claimed to be merely the furthest stretched tendrils of the main invasion force, which is still traveling the darkness of the void. Now, we tend to think of alien invasions as sudden singular events. A fleet appears on the radar, the sky goes dark, and the war begins. And for a long time, the Imperium of Man had to deal with just exactly that, because that's what they believed happened. The official Imperium records state that the first contact with this particular extragalactic nightmare occurred in the year 741 of the 41st millennium, when a massive swarm, later dubbed Hive Fleet Behemoth, crashed into the eastern fringes and absolutely obliterated the ocean world named Tyran. That's where the Tyranid name comes from. But here is where the story takes a massive, deeply unsettling turn. When the Inquisition started digging into the historical records and examining local biological anomalies, they realized something terrifying. Tyranids didn't just arrive. They've been here for a very long time. If you look at some of the most notoriously lethal wildlife in the galaxy, like the massive Catachan devils or the legendary Fenrisian krakens, you end up finding apex predators, but genetic analysis hints at something deeply wrong. They aren't native to this galaxy. They are heavily believed to be feral, devolved descendants of ancient hive fleets that probed the galaxy thousands upon thousands of years ago. But it gets so much worse. In 937 M41, on an isolated ice world, the famous Commissar Caiaphas Cain, hero of the Imperium, found something buried deep beneath the permafrost. It was a Tyranid bioship, and it had crashed and lay dormant, frozen in the ice for over 7,000 years, long before human colonization of the world occurred, and long before the Imperium even knew what a Tyranid was. This biological machine just put itself to sleep, waiting for what was to come, and it raises a profoundly sickening question. How many other Imperial worlds have dormant sleeper broods salted deep within their crusts, just waiting for the Hive Mind to hit the cosmic snooze button to wake them up? Hive Fleet Behemoth would eventually be stopped at the Battle of Macragge, but it took the Ultramarines, and though it may pain me to say, they are one of the greatest Space Marine chapters in existence, and to stop this, they had to sacrifice almost everything to do it. But the Hive Mind learns, and it adapts. Just a few decades later, Hive Fleet Kraken arrived. Instead of attacking as a single massive fist like Behemoth, Kraken attacked like a biological shotgun blast. Its fleet splintered into countless smaller tendrils, enveloping whole star systems and choking them out before the Imperial reinforcements could arrive and mobilize. They completely broke the backs of Space Marine chapters like the Emperor's Scythes and the Lamenters, though the latter were just unlucky. Kraken was eventually shattered at Iker 4 and the Eldari craft world of Iandon, but surviving splinters just kept drifting deeper into the galaxy, wreaking havoc wherever they went. And then came Hive Fleet Leviathan. In 997 M41, the Imperium was bracing for another attack from the Galactic Rim, but the Tyranids didn't come from the edge. Rather, they came from below. Leviathan surged upwards on the Z-axis, directly through the galactic plane, striking at the soft underbelly of the galaxy and instantly cutting off massive portions of the Imperium from any form of hope or rescue. The only thing that truly stalled Leviathan's apocalyptic advance was getting deliberately deflected into the Octarius sector, a massive empire of warmongering orcs. And for a time, it worked. The two super predators locked each other in an endless meat grinder. But honestly, that might have actually just doomed us all, as the Tyranids began emerging from that war zone victorious to higher and higher degrees, having absorbed the potent orc genetics into their own evolutionary pool and making them stronger even still. All of this, the billions dead, the drained planets, and the desperate last stands, leads to a report filed by the Imperial Strategic Collective in 998 M41. And this is a part of the lore that gives many the chills. They analyze the trajectories, the sheer mass, and the behavior of Behemoth, Kraken and Leviathan, and they came to a single horrifying conclusion. These world-ending fleets were not the main invasion force, they were just a vanguard. The strategic collective likened these three massive fleets to merely talons of a single approaching claw. To even have a mathematical chance of slowing down the main expeditionary force to arrive within a century, the Imperium would need to increase mobilization to a minimum of 500% and draft every single able-bodied man, woman, and mutant across 3 entire segmentums of the galaxy. And so we are left to wonder, with that, what could compel an entire species to cross the freezing nothingness between galaxies to survive a journey that took inconceivable energy and countless of million years in frozen hibernation? Did they consume everything in their home galaxy, forcing them to flee and find new feeding grounds? Or, and this is the truly terrifying thought that the stratagem came to, did they risk the endless void of intergalactic space because they were running from something far worse? So all of this existential dread culminates in the final days of the 41st millennium with what is known as the Devastation of Baal. Here, the bulk of Hive Fleet Leviathan was bearing down on the homeworld of the Blood Angels Space Marines. Knowing that they were staring down the barrel of extinction, the Blood Angels called every single one of their successor chapters, also known as the Sanguinary Brotherhood, to defend their Primarch's homeworld. But even with all those superhuman defenders gathered in near legion numbers, the sheer suffocating size of Leviathan's biomechanical fleet threatened to overwhelm them completely. But then, the universe essentially broke, and reality tore itself asunder, creating the galactic spanning wound known as the Great Rift. The massive warp storms that spilled out ripped through the Baal system. Here, the Tyranids fleet orbiting the planet was literally pulled apart, and the Devourer suffered a wound due to the madness of the warp being concentrated so harshly in this area. Down on the moon of Baal Prime, things got even stranger and stranger still. An army of demons invaded, led by the ancient, nigh invincible bloodthirster named Kabanda. Now, Kabanda absolutely hates the Blood Angels, but at the same time he loves them, in a way that is almost pathological. And he decided, long ago, that he was the only one allowed to truly destroy them, and he would not allow some mindless bugs to take Khorne's greatest prize from him. So the demons completely slaughtered every last Tyranid on the moon, halting the swarm, piling up their alien skulls into a massive, chilling sigil that was the size of mountains, all to send a message to the Blood Angels before vanishing back into the Immaterium. By the time the resurrected Primarch Rabut Guilliman arrived with his massive Indominus crusade, in order to clean up the remaining Tyranid ground forces, Baal was functionally saved, but it had come at a cost, as almost the entire Blood Angels chapter and many of their successor chapters were almost completely eradicated, some down to a man. To really understand how a fleet this massive gets to a planet like Baal, we have to look deeply at the unsettling biology of the Tyranids themselves. These armadas aren't built in a shipyard. A Tyranid hive fleet is a frightening accumulation of living, breathing void ships. They travel in these massive groups called tendrils, acting like the largest, most terrifying locust swarm you will ever see. Inside these gigantic living spacecraft are bubbles of reproductive organs, sacs containing countless gestating lesser Tyranid organisms. Every single one of these creatures is born to serve a specific service in the ship. And when they find a prey world, they don't invade out of pride, vengeance, or a desire for territory. It's highly doubtful that the Hive Mind even understands what these concepts are. They invade for one reason and one reason alone: to harvest biomass. Every action from the lowliest foot soldier to the most towering of beasts is honed and controlled to aid in the rapid and total absorption of the world's ecosystems. They literally strip the planet of every scrap of raw organic matter that they can find in order to feed the insatiable hunger and birth new monsters. And the way they travel through the void is a marvel of terrifying biological engineering, as they don't use the warp for faster than light travel like the Imperium does. Instead, they use highly specialized, selectively evolved hive ships called Narhaval. This creature is somehow able to manipulate gravity fields of distant star systems, effectively pulling the entire fleet across the universe at superliminal speeds. It's a cold and completely alien manipulation of physics performed entirely by meat and bone. With the opening of the Great Rift and the beginning of the Era Indomitus, you would think the Tyranids might finally be stopped. The galaxy is bleeding the raw matter of chaos into real space. And for the Tyranids, chaos is a massive problem. The demons of the warp offer absolutely zero biomass. It's like trying to survive by eating shadow, as it provides no vital substance and no way for it to replace the bioforms it loses in any conflict involving them. With more and more planets being swallowed up by empiric madness, the Tyranids are being denied the food that they so desperately need to power their galactic assaults. But the Tyranid species is defined by one thing above all else: adaptation. The timeless, unfeeling sentience of the Hive Mind doesn't panic. It didn't even worry, as it started developing new bioorganisms and an entirely new style of hunting pattern, all in order to deal with the ever-present threat of chaos. In the wake of their bizarre defeat at Baal, the surviving remnants of Hive Fleet Leviathan simply pivoted, launching massive new offensives along the southern border of the Segmentum Solar, pushing ever closer towards Holy Terra itself. Guilliman has been forced to throw dozens upon dozens of newly founded Primaris Space Marine chapters at the front lines in order to slow them down, in what is now being called the Third Tyrannic War. And here's one of the more terrifying thoughts. When you look at the galactic map and you see the different Tyranid hive fleets, they don't seem to come all from the same place. They are approaching the Milky Way galaxy from entirely distinct directions. If they are swarming us from all sides, it implies that they haven't consumed just a few planets. It implies that the Tyranids have already consumed a terrifying number of galaxies, all surrounding ours, and we are meant to be the last meal on the table. When you really look at how the Tyranids operate, comparing them to an invading army doesn't quite work. The way they inverge their way into the realms of mankind and other xenospecies is much more like watching a disease spread through a healthy body. A Tyranid hive fleet isn't a military armada, but rather a collection of millions of biomechanical craft, with each ship acting as a massive host to an untold number of symbiotic organisms. Every single creature that drops onto a planet was birthed in the bubbling reproductive chambers of those ships, and they exist for one reason and one reason only: to service the fleet. Unlike the Imperium or the Tau, who fight for conquest and survival, or even the forces of chaos and the orcs who just want to wreak havoc, the Tyranids have no ideology. They are driven by a deeply ingrained, uncontrollable instinct found in all life forms: reproduction. They want to breed, acquire new genetic traits, and evolve into better adapted metapredators. They are capable of outproducing and outconsuming and even outlasting absolutely anything they encounter. And the terrifying reality of this all is that they have done this an unknowable amount of times across the intergalactic void. Now, for a long time, the Imperium scientists, the Magos biologists, categorized each hive fleet as its own separate entity. They saw fleets like Behemoth, Kraken, and Leviathan using different strategies and breeding unique bioforms, and assumed they were all competing forces. But in truth, it's much worse. Every single fleet is just a splinter of one unfathomably massive assemblage, as there are billions of Tyranid swarms so thick that they literally block out the stars. But they aren't individuals. Every single creature is just a cell of a singular cosmic superorganism. We call this Gestalt sentience the Hive Mind. It is an ancient and unknowable consciousness that stretches out across hundreds of light years. Most Tyranid organisms don't even have minds that would understand what they are. They are just biological tools acting entirely on baser instincts, until the implacable will of the Hive Mind takes over the wheel to actually direct the swarm on the ground. The Hive Mind uses specialized bioforms like Tyranid warriors and the massive Tyranid hive tyrants. These creatures act almost like biological Wi-Fi routers, and they don't speak, but rather they use synaptic forms of telepathy to channel the will of the hive mind into the lesser beasts around them, slaving them to a single psychic imperative. So they fight in the perfect, terrifying union of one entity across millions of places. But this is also their one true weakness. If you manage to kill one of these synapse creatures, the psychic link is severed, and without the hive mind's control, the lesser organisms instantly revert to their base animalistic behaviors, fleeing or just mindlessly lashing out at each other. But before the first drop spore ever hits a planet's surface, before a singular tyrant is ever seen, something else arrives first. And honestly, it has to be one of the most terrifying parts of the whole Tyranid invasion process. Imagine you're just living on an Imperial world, and one day, the astropaths, the psychic communicators who send messages across the stars, start screaming. Then the planet goes deathly silent, as the system has been smothered in the psychic static, which completely disrupts interstellar communication and warp travel. This phenomena is known as the shadow in the warp. We don't even know if it is a deliberate weapon used by the fleets or just a biological byproduct. It might literally just be the white noise generated by billions of alien minds communicating with each other all at once. Whatever it is, it instills a passive, unnatural dread into the minds of everyone on the planet. For heavily psychic species or luckless human psychers, the shadow is pure torture. If they try to use their abilities, the psychic sound of a trillion alien thoughts screeches into their skulls at once, pitching them into absolute insanity as they just repeat alien syllables they can't even comprehend. For the Imperium of Man, this is a potential death sentence because they rely so heavily on warp communication and travel. The shadow in the warp can completely cut off a planet from the rest of the galaxy, and by the time the shadow falls over your world, it may already be too late, as you can't call for reinforcements, you can't evacuate. You are now completely alone, left to face the endless biological nightmare with whatever weapons you happen to have on hand, knowing that there's absolutely nothing that can come to save you. To really wrap your heads around how terrifying this invasion is, we have to stop looking at the Tyranids as an army and looking at them as a single impossibly massive body. Every single Tyranid shares a psychic bond known as a synapse. This isn't just a communication network, it is a literal nervous system of a galactic superorganism. From the microscopic bacteria designed to decompose flesh, to the rooted plant-like flora they drop on the surface, all the way up to the miles-long hive ships, every single biological entity has a specific place within the will of the hive mind. The lesser creatures, the foot soldiers, the microbes, the feeder beasts are all completely mindless. They are just biological automatons running on instinct, like white blood cells attacking an infection. But the larger, more complex creatures act as brain cells. These are synapse creatures, and their biology is where things get unsettling. Their brains have a literal cortex alteration that allows them to function as giant psychic routers and hubs. They take the riotous, deafening cacophony of the hive mind that spans solar systems and police it, funneling those psychic imperatives down to the lesser bugs. Without these living routers, the swarm falters, and the connection drops, leaving these smaller creatures to revert to animalistic pack behaviors. The craziest thing of this all is that the synapse creatures are potent psychers, broadcasting across the stars, yet somehow they manage to do this all without drawing the attention of the warp-bound predators or even demons. It's a level of biological perfection that human scientists can't even begin to comprehend. Now this brings us to a massive question. If the Tyranids don't use the warp like the Imperium, how exactly do these bugs travel faster than the speed of light? Because if they're just drifting around space at sublight speeds, it would take them millions of years to get from one system to another. Now the answer actually lies in the highly specialized, deeply bizarre bioships that the Imperial servants have classified as Narvahal. The Narvahal are completely unique in the Tyranid fleet because they're almost completely defenseless. There's virtually no bioweaponry and only razor-thin protective carapaces upon them. Instead of weapons, the bow of the ship is covered in a cluster of hypersensitive monofilament spines. These spines act as massive sensory organs, allowing the Narvahal to take in a broad spectrum of gravimetric and electromagnetic signals from extreme interstellar distances. Once it detects a prey system, it does something that breaks our understanding of physics. It uses the gravity of its own target's star system against it. Through some unknown biological mechanism, the Narvahal manipulates that distant gravity to create a compressed space-time transit corridor, essentially folding a tunnel through space-time where the entire Hive fleet can just slip through. The catch of it all is that this fragile biological space warping cannot be used near strong gravitational sources because it completely overwhelms the Narvahal's delicate sensors. So the fleet has to drop out of faster than light at the very edge of a solar system and then use conventional biological propulsion for the final stretch. That means that it can take Terran years and sometimes even decades for a fleet to actually reach a planet once it enters a star system. It's a slow and agonizing, impeccably terrifying approach. But here's where things get a little nasty. The Narvahal's manipulation of the star system's gravity isn't a clear process, as it produces a massive unintended side effect upon the destination world. Imagine you are living on an Imperial planet once more. Dreadful, I know. Long before the sky goes dark with alien ships, long before the shadow and the warp cuts off communications, the planet itself starts turning against you. The gravitational distortion of the approaching Tyranid fleet causes massive earthquakes to level cities, solar flares that scorch atmospheres, and continental tidal waves that swallow coastlines. All this because the planet is literally tearing itself apart under the physical weight of the approaching Hive fleet pulling on the world's gravity. It is an apocalyptic scenario all on its own. But for the Tyranids, it's just an incredibly convenient biological byproduct, because by the time the fleet finally drifts on its slow, agonizing path and the first flesh-eating drop spores begin to fall from the sky, the planet's defenses are already exhausted and the cities are mostly laid in ruin, their resources depleted in rebuilding, having spent the last decade trying to survive their own world tearing itself apart, meaning that they have become softened and ready to consume. Now, this is where the sheer biological horror of the Tyranids really sets in, and it is when we think of them, rather than like armies and soldiers picking up weapons, as a biological entity that grows the tools of war. The Tyranids appear in a staggering multitude of genera, and their evolution is completely artificial and directed in real time by the Hive Mind. When they encounter a new threat, the dead biomatter of the swarm is scooped up and tossed back into a massive bubbling digestive system of the digestive pools and re-engineered to counter whatever just killed it. It's an ecosystem functioning as a military-industrial complex, as every single creature has a terrifying specific purpose. At the absolute top of the ground forces is, as mentioned before, the Hive Tyrants. These are the massive, enormously strong creatures that act as literal field commanders for the swarm. But more importantly, they are the strongest of the synapse creatures, meaning that they are the Hive Mind made flesh. But if you kill one, the Hive Mind doesn't really care. It will grow another. Then you have the Brood Lords, the absolute apex of the Genestealer breed. These are intelligent, adaptable horrors that are usually the very first things to make planetfall. They infiltrate and coordinate hidden cults, tearing apart the defenses from the inside out before the main fleet ever even considers arriving. This is where things get incredibly unsettling from an evolutionary standpoint, because the Tyranids steal the best parts of species that they consume. Take the Tyranid Guard, for example. These are completely blind, heavily armored beasts bred exclusively to act as living shields for the Tyranids. It is a highly classified, borderline blasphemous secret within the Adeptus Mechanicus, but genetic analysis suggests that these things were created using the stolen DNA from defeated Space Marines. And it doesn't stop there. The zoanthropes, the floating big-brained psychic artillery that can melt your mind, are heavily believed to be the results of the Hive Mind assimilating the DNA of psychically gifted Eldari. The Biovores, the sluggish sessile artillery beasts that spam spore mines across the battlefield, their genetic base, well, the Orcs. Even the infamous Genestealers, the ferocious shock troops that use human societies to breed their cults, are derived from human DNA. This is because the Tyranids don't just kill you, they turn you into their own evolutionary triumph, turning the very DNA of a species into its own weapon. When an actual invasion begins, the sky darkens with gargoyles. These are winged horrors with atrophied legs, and the ground is swallowed by gaunts. These are the basic staple units of the Tyranid hive swarm. They aren't the strongest, but they are fully mutable and easily grown with bizarre venom sacs or bizarre biomechanical spike rifles and come in numbers that mathematically overwhelm defenses. When the fighting is done, the Rippers are released. These are just small snake-like mouths designed to eat everything that is left over, including the Tyranid dead, so the nutrients can be carried back to the ships. But if you think hiding will save you, you haven't met the lictors. These are the large chameleonic organisms that are bred for pure stealth. They range ahead of the swarms, completely invisible, performing commando raids and eating the brains of their victims so they may absorb their memories and the intelligence of the species that they consume. Entire Astra Militarum squads have vanished in the time it takes a commander to blink when facing them, since they are so perfectly adapted to the environment that they can out-stealth the legendary Catachan jungle fighters in their own elements 9 times out of 10. When the Hive Mind needs to break into a fortified position, they don't use siege engines. Rather, they drop the Carnifex, originally called the Screamer Killers. These huge, hulking, living battering rams serve as a Tyranid's equivalent to tanks. They are covered in symbiotic weaponry and mutated to spit acid or crush armor. But the most terrifying heavy hitters are the ones you never see coming. These are the Trigons, their blind worm-like subspecies, and the Molochs tunnel deep into the earth. A Moloch can track you through solid rock just by sensing the rhythmic pressure waves of your heartbeat, and it triggers localized tremors right before they erupt. It is also noted that they prefer to swallow their prey whole, so you can be digested alive over several days. Finally, we have to look at the absolute apex of the Tyranid hive beasts. When the Tyranids encountered the Imperial Titans, walking machines the size of skyscrapers, they saw the beauty in them and decided to evolve their own. These are the Biotitans, ranging anywhere from 9 to 30 meters tall, roughly 30 to 100 feet in patriotic freedom units. These are massive enough to casually wipe out an entire Space Marine squad by accidentally stepping on them. And directing all this safe in orbit are the Norn Queens. These aren't fighters, but rather they are gargantuan biomechanical wombs housed in chambers hundreds of meters aboard the hive ships. They are the true mothers of the swarm, endlessly tweaking and playing around with the genetic code, taking the slaughtered biomass of a billion worlds and endlessly birthing the next new nightmares. Up until now, we've talked about the Tyranids like an overwhelming blunt force trauma of teeth, claws, and spines, but that's actually only half this. The Hive Mind doesn't always start an invasion with a planet-wide assault. It often begins with an absolute chilling amount of subterfuge. And this is where the biology of the Tyranids gets fascinating and deeply horrifying at the same time. Imagine an Imperial salvage crew boarding a derelict ship known as a massive space hulk, drifting through the void. Deep inside the dark corridors, they find Genestealers waiting. In self-induced hibernation, the creatures ambush the crew, slaughtering almost everyone. But they always, for some reason, unbeknownst to the crew, leave one survivor. Instead of killing this final victim, the Genestealers implant them with a biological seed. This is a highly engineered parasitic Tyranid retrovirus. This infection is designed not to be fatal. Instead, it fundamentally rewrites the victim's DNA, altering their biology and physiology. The host is then compelled to return to their homeworld and reproduce as much as possible. Because their cells have been hijacked by Tyranid genetics, any offspring they have will be a Genestealer hybrid. These hybrids are psychically bonded to their parents, ensuring absolute loyalty. Over generations, they breed and multiply in the shadows, forming massive hidden Genestealer cults as they infiltrate the planet's society and political structures, placing sleeper agents in the government and the military. As the cult grows into millions upon millions, they formed a localized psychic link known as a brood mind. This network acts as a blazing beacon in the warp, calling to the distant hive fleets directly and leading them to their world. Just as a Tyranid armada darkens the sky, the cult initiates a planet-wide rebellion. The planetary defenses are crippled from the inside out. And now you aren't just fighting an alien invasion, you are fighting your own planetary governors and your own military along with your people. When the actual invasion force does arrive, they bring a level of biomechanical horror that defies human logic. The Tyranids do not build starships, weapons, or ammunition out of metal or plastic. They have zero mechanical technology. Instead, they use advanced gene splicing to grow their entire military industrial complex from reconstituted biomatter of the very planets they are consuming and have already consumed. Every single weapon, gland, and projectile is a living Tyranid organism in its own right. When a Tyranid warrior fires a biocannon at you, it isn't shooting a bullet, it's firing a hungry parasitic organism designed to burrow into your flesh and eat you from the inside out. Even the grotesque spires that burst from the ground and the toxic spores polluting the atmosphere are living biomorphs. The biology here is incredibly symbiotic. These creatures fuse into each other's flesh, to the point that it is impossible to tell where one soldier begins and its weapon ends. A warrior beast wielding razor-sharp bone swords is literally just holding an extension of its own nervous system, because everything is grown rather than manufactured. The Hive Fleet's armory can adapt its weapons to whatever it needs to in a matter of hours. If it really needs creatures that can fly, burrow, or stalk, they just alter the genetic codes and give birth to new, perfectly adapted monsters. Though never a verdant world, the lifeless ball of rock that we discovered was unrecognizable as Tyran Prime. The creatures that did this are a threat to the galaxy and must be exterminated by the light of the God Emperor. This is an excerpt from Inquisitor Fides Cryptman. When the Tyranids fully commit to a battlefield, their doctrine is simple and overwhelming. Use suffocating numbers in order to win. They generally aim to outnumber their enemy 50-1, closing the distance faster than most armies can react, drowning their opposition in a tide of claw, teeth, and chitin. The invasion process itself happens in a series of distinct calculated stages. First, the spores alter the climate and the ecosystem, making the biomatter easier to digest. Then the vanguard organisms hunt down the defenders. Finally, the fleet proper descends to finish the job, literally inhaling the atmosphere. They drink the oceans, consume every single cell of organic biomass until the planet is nothing but an airless, barren tomb of lifeless rock. Hunger briefly sated, the fleet drifts back into the void, looking to find its next meal. And that is the ultimate existential terror that makes the Tyranids the Tyranids. As you cannot communicate with them, you cannot reason with them. You cannot even seek to appease or surrender to them. To the Hive Mind, humanity is nothing more than domesticated livestock waiting to be harvested. Vast swaths of the galaxy have already been completely scoured of life, and with every passing year, more fleets wake from their aeons-long slumber in the space between galaxies, as the Hive Mind is gathering and remembering its single age-old purpose: feed, grow, survive, evolve. Now, to go into more specifics, we have to comprehend that long before the fleet arrives, the Hive Mind sends its scouts, as they need to evaluate the planet's vulnerabilities and begin infecting native life forms. The scariest phase is that the Tyranids evolved, specifically the Vanguard. The drone ships, the Lictors, the Genestealers operate almost completely independently from the Hive Mind. They exhibit an uncharacteristic degree of self-preservation and animal cunning because they know they have to survive long enough to lay the groundwork for the swarm. Vanguard drone ships are incredibly fast and remarkably small, possessing reduced psychic signatures to make them even harder to detect. They slip into star systems completely undetected, drop their living cargo onto the surface of a target planet, then quietly drift back into the void in order to find the next world. Because their time in system is so brief, Imperial agents rarely notice them. But if one is spotted, it immediately becomes the highest priority in the sector. If you don't destroy that drone ship before it drops its payload, your world is already running on borrowed time. Once a cargo hits the dirt, the biological horror truly begins. And in from left field with a steel chair enter the Lictors. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, these creatures are absolute masterpieces of unseen reconnaissance. They are chameleonic in nature, completely blending into the wilds of their new planet. Using specialized feeder tendrils, they sample and analyze the planet's atmosphere, mineral availability, and complex genetic traits of all native life. They don't just hunt, they target isolated animals and humans specifically to devour their brains and absorb their memories. They are literally eating military intelligence. As soon as a synoptic link is available, they broadcast all the phenotypical and strategic data back to the Hive Mind, so the incoming fleet can perfectly tailor their bioweapons to the planet-specific ecosystems and defenses. And then you have the Genestealers, who we touched upon before. But the way they operate on the ground is rather insidious. They infect the local fauna and the intelligent populations with Tyranid genetic material, which is the highly engineered retrovirus fundamentally corrupting the host's DNA, ensuring that any future offsprings are born as Tyranid hybrids. These creatures can also infiltrate without drone ships, hiding in cargo holds of Imperial freighters and other such vessels. If you don't find and eliminate them with extreme prejudice and all those, including the newborns, they will establish a breeding nest and quickly begin to outpace the reproductive rate of your native population. Once they have successfully integrated into the planet's biosphere, these infiltrators will emit the psychic beacon spoken about earlier directly into the void, which serves as a dinner bell and summons the hive ship proper. The arrival of the hive ship heralds the next stage, which is a true infestation. These biomechanical leviathans are such powerful psychic nodes that their mere presence disrupts the localized warp for light years around them. These creatures create the shadow and the warp. By the time the ship enters orbit proper, all the faster than light travel and the astropathic choir shuts down almost entirely. You can't call for help, and you can't even get a rescue fleet to arrive on time. The psychic static emanating from the warp prevents you entering or exiting the warp properly, meaning that the planet is almost completely trapped within the world. Once in range, the hive ship unleashes a localized apocalypse as it rains down massive, fleshy pods called mycetic spores into the atmosphere. These don't just drop troops, they aggressively begin microbial terraforming. Some pods are filled with entirely hostile alien microorganisms that immediately begin breaking down the planet's soil, oceans, and atmosphere, recombining complex organic molecules into a biological soup the swarm can easily absorb. Other spores carry the heavy hitters, strains of gaunts and gargoyles that immediately begin preparing the surface for war, while massive worm-like trigons and marlocks burrow deeply into the planet's crust as they dig. They also plant highly specialized spores that grow into towering capillary towers and spore chimneys, altering the very air and securing the subterranean mineral wealth of the world for the hive. The exact moment the sky starts falling, the Genestealers and the Lictors, which have been hiding in the shadows, finally reveal themselves. The Genestealer Cult, using the military knowledge and equipment they have stolen, alongside the hybrid sleeper agents that they bred into the planet, orchestrate a massive coordinated sabotage. They selectively target commanding officers and communication hubs, crippling the planet's defenses from the inside out. If a planet's defenders don't take rapid, decisive action and exterminate all of them without remorse, all hope may be lost. You have to lock down all communication centers and prevent the cultists from blinding your military as soon as possible. If possible, you have to aim everything you have at the sky and destroy the hive ships, because even the Tyranids have limits to the resources, and if you can kill the central psychic nodes, the remaining ground forces lose all cohesion, becoming little more than mindless animals. Without the hive mind goading them, the terrifying unified swarm fractures into confusion and animalistic cannibalism, since they have been bred to eat, devour, and consume, giving humanity a desperate, fleeting chance to divide and conquer what's left. However, for a full understanding, let's view things as if the cults have fully crippled the defenses, and the shadow of the warp has cut off all communication, and the hive ships have begun dropping their spores. Then we can ask ourselves, what happens next? And it wouldn't be a battle. It would be a localized extinction event, as endless swarms of smaller bioforms, gaunts, gargoyles, genestealers, flood across the land, sky, and oceans. Interspaced amongst them are the heavy hitters, the Carnifexes, the Tyrannofexes, and the towering Hierophant Biotitans. And they don't fight in squads. They form unified battlefronts that can be hundreds of kilometers long, or in patriotic freedom units, miles long, while simultaneously not only fighting, but behind these front lines, they continue to terraform at greater and greater rates of speed. The spores planted by the burrowing creatures burst through the planet's crust, erupting into capillary towers, thousands of miles high. These towers look like massive alien plant life, but in reality they are just aggressive, walking bioforms as they shoot their tendrils through the ground to absorb the indigenous plants and slow-moving animals, while simultaneously filtering the atmosphere to digest airborne microbes. If the sheer number of the swarms of Hermagonts, supported by Tyranid warriors and Termagants, aren't enough to break fortified positions, the Hive Mind immediately adapts, as it might drop ravenous shriekers from the sky, or send massive trigons to burrow directly beneath the enemy lines, collapsing the ground out from under the defenders. The Hive Mind is perfectly willing to sacrifice thousands upon thousands of bodies to take a single foot of ground, but it never wastes the biomass. As the battlefront pushes forward, it leaves a massive carpet of dead, these be both human and fallen Tyranids. But it isn't a graveyard. Instead, it is a buffet for the next wave. Up above, swarms of gargoyles and harpies fly in numbers so dense that they literally block out the sun, completely shutting down the photosynthesis for any remaining native plant life. At this stage, you can't just kill a hive ship and expect to win. The Tyranid genetic taint has reached a microbial level by this point. Even if you killed 99.99% of the swarm, that 0.1% will remain, and it is highly resistant to toxins and will just keep mutating and breeding. You have to cleanse the planet down to the last cell of Tyranid, or the nightmare will just start all over again. As the battlefront moves forward, the cleanup crew arrives. This is where the true gluttonous horror of the Tyranids is realized. As the sky rains thousands of myriadic spores, each filled with maggot-like creatures called rippers. These things form massive, tightly packed, writhing swarms that devour every piece of organic matter. In the battlefront's wake, living or dead, human or Tyranid, these abominations will gorge themselves to the bursting point, but they don't regurgitate the food. They drag their bloated bodies to localized digestive pits created by the capillary towers known as reclamation pools and hurl themselves in, digesting themselves along with everything they just ate. The hive mind will then grow more rippers to continue the cycle. This gluttony happens everywhere, as eel-like variants strip the oceans of sea life, while burrowing rippers consume subterranean fungi and root system. The capillary towers grow so large that they can withstand the crushing depths of the ocean floor, altering the planet's tidal flow as they filter the marine biome. They even start eating the planet's rare minerals in order to build stronger armor for future fleets. If a planet reaches this stage, it is completely unsalvageable, and the only effective resource the Imperium has left is Exterminatus, the complete fiery destruction of a planet from orbit. As you aren't trying to save this world anymore, you are trying to deny the Tyranids the biomass so this fleet doesn't grow stronger and start another invasion. Finally, when the resistance is truly broken and the world is dead, the Hive Fleet now truly fed, the capillary towers have become engorged with the planet's biological wealth, and they stretch so high into the sky they pierce through the atmosphere. At this point, the hive ships in low orbit lower vast fleshy feeding tendrils to dock with these towers. Through a terrifying combination of immense suction and massive pumping organs, the liquid biomass of an entire world is sucked up into these ships. Once the last defender falls, the surviving Tyranid bioforms don't celebrate. They simply walk into their digestive reclamation pools and dissolve themselves, returning their biomass to the fleet to be recycled for the next war. It isn't just flesh and bone that gets absorbed. The hive mind takes all genetic innovations, the DNA and the memories of the planet's native life. Then the towers start draining the water systems. The void-faring bioforms expand, their storage vehicles bloating to hold the oceans of a dead world. Then the capillary towers begin to break down, digesting themselves, just to be pulled up into the ship, followed by the very atmosphere of the planet itself. Imperial Magi biologists still don't fully understand how the biological creature can compress an entire planet's atmosphere into a storage state, but the result is undeniable. When a Tyranid hive fleet finally pulls away, drifting back into the cold void to analyze the newly stolen DNA and grow new nightmares, it leaves absolutely nothing behind. Just barren, airless rock, silently drifting in the dark. And I think that's where we'll leave it for today, because when you look at the entirety of the 40k universe, there are plenty of factions that don't just want to enslave you, torture you, or conquer you for some dark and twisted ideology. There's also the Tyranids, as they don't hate us except for that one instance where they developed a deep and gnawing hatred of the Blood Angels. They don't even care that our civilization exists. To the Hive Mind, the greatest empires of humanity are just calories waiting to be harvested. They are the ultimate cosmic horror because they represent an inevitable, unstoppable apex of the food chain, slowly drifting out of the dark to finally clean the plate of all that remains. But before the Shadow and the Warp completely cuts off our signature, if you enjoyed the descent into the biological nightmare, please consider feeding the algorithm by leaving a like on the video, as it really helps the channel evolve and grow. If you want to get more content, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I promise you that the Four-Armed Emperor truly loves you. Also, definitely leave a comment down below, because views aren't the only thing that matters to the algorithm anymore. They really like comments and interaction. Also, let me know what you thought about this deep dive into the Tyranids, and what other dark and terrifying corner of the Warhammer galaxy I should take a deep dive into next. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. I really do. Stay safe out there and keep an eye on the skies, and I'll see you in the next one.